Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We've had a morning of technical challenges, not so much with Drew and today's presentation, but we were doing some tests for some future presentations, and it's just been one of those mornings. So I'm delighted to actually be getting into a webinar where we may be able to talk about some interesting stuff and learn a few things, as opposed to me wanting to smash my computer screens. Today's webinar is with Drew Meldon from ACTAVO Events. You've all heard of ACTAVO at this stage if you've been on these webinars. Drew is a vastly experienced rigger and specifically a rigger in events and in entertainment. So I think today's session should give those of us who don't know too much about the rigging side of things an insight into what it is, what's involved, how you get into it, and even people who are involved in it, who knows, you may pick up a thing or two or learn a thing or two. Usual story, please use the chat function to ask questions. We will keep track of questions in there, and we'll bring them to Drew at the end. We'll do a Q&A at the end. So anything that does come up, if you want us to ask Drew anything or get an insight into anything or ask more about something he touched on during the presentation, just pop it in the chat, and we will keep track of it there, and we'll come to it at the end. While Drew is from ACTAVO, and you'll be hearing ACTAVO a lot, I'd imagine, during this presentation, I still do want to thank ACTAVO and Paul Griffin, who I know is in the room as well, for the support for these. Again, they came on board very, very early. They didn't need any arms twisted. They were very keen to get involved, and then we're happy to have them on board and happy to be working with them. We were actually lucky to be operational on an event at the weekend. Oh, Emily's here. Hi, Emily. We were lucky enough to be operational on a couple of events at the weekend and got to work with Paul and his team on a couple of events here. So that is also the reason, for any of you wondering, that I'm a little bit behind on certificates for a couple of these webinars, and I still have to get the recording from last Friday's session up as well. So bear with me. I'll catch up within a day or two now that we're not operational. I'll get those things sorted, and they'll be up in the usual spots. And if you were on those webinars, you'll get the attendance certificate will appear in your inbox, and you'll also be sent a link to the recording. So apologies for that. Give me a day or two and I'll catch up. I guess when you've spent months not being too operational and suddenly we do have a couple of events on, we end up falling behind on other stuff. So I will get that sorted. So I think that's probably all you need to hear from me. Drew is probably ready to take over there, so I will let him go through the presentation. Like Chris wants his money back. I will definitely send you a refund, Chris, don't worry. So I'll let Drew take over, and he can press the big green button, and I'll let him bring you through a journey through rigging for entertainment and events. And I shall speak to you guys afterwards again when we do the Q&A. So Drew, press that big green button there if you want, and off you go.
Morning, Mark. Good morning, Mark. Can you hear me?
Sir, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to present this presentation. Hi, folks. Let's see. Have you got the first slide up there, Mark?
Is that acting up on you, is it? Give me 1 second.
Can
it
you?
Doesn't seem to be.
I pressed the green button.
And did it not start for you now? See, and more
No.
technical difficulties. Give
Let's
me
have a
1
look.
second, and I'll see if start presentation.
You can hear me okay anyway, can't
No,
you?
I can hear you perfectly. Yeah, just for some reason that presentation, now that we really wanted to start, doesn't want to start. Actually, it's not even showing me the big green button. It's as if you have pressed the big green button.
I have pressed the big green button.
But nothing.
Will I press next?
Hit next and see, does it? No, for some reason it's not taking. Oh, for some reason it's not taking over the screen. It could well be playing there somewhere. Try and cancel out of it. If you can stop it on your end, we may be able to just kind of reset things. You should be able to get to a cancel button down the.
I did it, yeah. I've cancelled it there.
Okay, let's see. Is it giving me? Have you the option on the green button again?
No, if I hit the slide,
Yeah.
it says start presentation.
Okay, do that again. And
I'll
then does it
hit.
give you that green button?
It doesn't give me the green
Yeah,
button, Mark.
you're getting it grayed out, same as I'm getting it grayed out, which is rather annoying. I wonder, give me a second and I'll see what we can do here.
I presume we're live at the moment, are we?
Oh, we are, yeah. Talk away to people there and tell them all about rigging, and I'll see if I get this working. It'll suddenly, hopefully, take over the screen and you can launch into it. But you can start
Okay,
talking
well,
there if you like.
the slides really are just eye candy anyway, so just to give people something to look at rather than my ugly mug. So how are you doing, folks? My name is Drew Meldon. I'm rigging manager for ACTAVO Events. I'm responsible for advancing projects, organizing crew and equipment, and completing compliance criteria. I'm a level 3 NRC supervisor rigger, an advanced scaffolder, and I've worked in the entertainment business for over 30 years. Today I'm going to give you an overview of entertainment rigging. But first I'll give you my background. I completed a certificate in media studies in Dublin and emigrated, like a lot of people, in the early 80s over to London, where I went looking for work in music video production. I started off running on jobs and then got a job as production assistant with Jackie Byford and David Mallet from MGMM. They produced videos for Bowie, Queen, AC/DC, The Stones, Elton John. My first job with them was in Brussels, where we shot Queen's Hammer to Fall. And I remember at the time looking at the lighting rig, which was mammoth and chock-a-block full of par cans. At the time, there were no moving heads, there were no Very lights. So I moved into rigging, working on music videos, and then on into commercials, TV, and features. In the late 90s, I moved back to Dublin. And while waiting to get a union ticket for film rigging here, I worked on several stage builds. We did Robbie Williams and Slane in 1999, Bon Jovi, among others. In 2000, I did my basic scaffolding course, and then I went on and did an advanced scaffolding course. Due to tax breaks, film projects dried up quite a bit, and I moved over into the events industry and into the construction industry as a scaffolder. I worked on a petrochemical shutdown in Sweden, various historic building projects and stage builds. Then I started working with Event Link as a scaffolding supervisor and doing stage building and the like. And then I got work with EventSurf when they started off, and they are now called ACTAVO Events. So again, we were working building stages and scaffolding for events. Then we got the opportunity to supply riggers, local riggers for MCD promotions. And I did a lot of rigging on trade shows. Then I was asked to work as their rigging manager. So working in the sector, it's been my experience that the majority of rigging crew clients, venue providers and service providers are top class here. They have in-depth industry knowledge, 100% committed to safety, and have the utmost integrity in all the projects that I've been involved in. Just a little bit, the difference between film rigging and event rigging.
Drew, are you with me?
Yes, Mark, I am.
There's a. This is the first time we've had to do it, but there's a big panic button that we can press,
Oh,
and I had exhausted every other angle, so I've had to press that to get everyone out of that room and bring them back into a new room. And now the presentation is working. So if you pop your camera on again, it's probably magically turned off because I hit the panic button. So there we go. I will do this. I'll put you over there. I shall disappear myself, and we should be where we wanted to be. Yeah, people are saying we're back. Sorry about that, folks. As you probably know, some of you guys have been here on all these presentations. That's the first time I've had to use the big yellow panic button. But no matter what I did, I could not get presentation to do what we wanted it to do. So we seem to be good to go. So Drew, you should be good, and you should just have to hit that magic next button now, and we should be fine.
right. Um, okay, I don't see a magic next button. Oh, yes, here we go. Yes, yeah. How far did we get, Mark? Should I just carry on where I left off
Yeah,
or start
literally,
from the
because
beginning again?
everyone you were talking about, I think you were just about to talk about the difference between,
That's right, yeah.
yeah. So literally, that's when it will have cut off for everyone, and it took the 10 seconds, and now they're all back in a new room. So everyone will have heard as far as there. So you're good.
Excellent. Right. Okay. So let's go through some of these slides. As I say, the slides are really just eye candy and don't necessarily correspond to what I'm talking about. So because it's quite technical, you know, so there's some slides of guys at work. So I was talking about the film work, difference between film work and film rigging and event rigging. Film rigging, a lot of the work is in compression, so you're building scaffolding, tube and fitting scaffolding, building platforms for lights and cameras, support for sets and specialized rigs. You're also doing quite a lot of work in tension, so you're lifting and supporting loads. There's hanging structures and wire work for counterweight rigs. Whereas in entertainment rigging, it's all in tension. It's all in tension. So there is a bit of crossover because riggers quite often work on projects building ground support structures, for example, outdoor stages and ground support trusses, etc. Generally with a purpose to actually hanging stuff out of them or supporting something. So I would like to use an analogy. That's a picture of me on the left. Right. So it's a bit of a simple analogy, really, but anyway, rigging is like driving a car. You need to understand the task and where you're going. You need to choose the vehicle that's appropriate for the task. You have to have the safety measures in place to protect the driver, seat belts, airbags, etc. You need to have the right requirements to make the vehicle go, fuel, water, etc. You need to provide any special equipment that you need for child, like for example, child seats or accessibility vehicles. You need to ensure that the vehicle is roadworthy and you're competent to drive it. You need to arrange permissions, insurance, permission from the owner, tax, obey the rules of the road, avoid shortcuts and congestion, and you need to respect other road users, provide proof of compliance at checkpoints, and finish the journey, park up, hand over your charge, and go home safely. So safety is first and foremost in everything we do. Under EU directives, we have our primary legislation, Health and Safety at Work Act, which details employers, employees, manufacturers, suppliers and installers' responsibilities. There's also a raft of regulations that affect the work that we do. We've got our manual handling regs, working at height regs, management of health and safety at work regs. We also have lifting operations and the provision and use of work equipment regs. Plus there's the CDM regs, which is the construction design management regulations. And there are also industry-specific regulations that we need to follow as well. Because in event rigging, we are quite often suspending loads over people's heads, and we're involved in multi-hoist lifts. Most legislation is goal setting, so it doesn't actually tell us how to achieve the goal. For this, we use codes of practice, and that's where we get our best practice from. Best practice, following best practice is your best defense in the event of any legal action. So rigging is defined by Plaza as the installation, removal, or other activity using lifting or suspension equipment or accessories used in tension for lifting or supporting display, production, performance, or event technical requirements. And a rigger is a competent person employed to undertake rigging. Competency is a combination of training and experience. There's 3 types of training. There's your statutory training, which is safe pass, manual handling, working at height. And then there's your skills training, which is rigging training, plant operations, construction skills training. And then the third type is product or system training. Experience obviously is something you get from the job, working in jobs alongside competent people, picking up your trade, learning the tricks, and getting to know how to use the tools. So competency needs to be assessed and also certified. I forgot to press on the slides, folks. So here we go. Bad practices. Sorry about this. Now, here we go. NRC is the National Rigging Certificate. It's really the only game in town for entertainment rigging. It's not a training scheme, it's an assessment scheme. They assess the skills that you should have and the knowledge that you need to have to work as a rigger in the entertainment industry. It's very useful. It gives you the confidence that you know what you're doing, have the right knowledge. It also gives employers and insurance, etc., the confidence that you also know what you're doing. So we're going to look at the riggers' roles and responsibilities. A rigging team consists of a head rigger, grounders, and top riggers. So ground riggers and top riggers. Generally, they're broken down into teams of 3. So you'll have a ground rigger and two top riggers or up riggers. Following the RAMs and toolbox talks and signing, reading, and understanding your risk assessment and method statement, the first task is to measure out. This is called walk and chalk. And it's where we, using the rigging plot, we mark out the positions on the floor of the plot with chalk using symbols and identification marks. The head rigger will then check these positions to make sure that they're achievable in the roof and negotiate with the production if any of them need to move. Then the positions are marked up, whether they're dead hangs or bridles, and the makeup of the bridle is marked on the floor as well. The next task is choosing the rigging accessories and the hoists and prepping those. The top riggers go up to the roof, drop their ropes in, and the rigging accessories, chain and hook, are tied on, hauled up to the roof, where connections are made into the roof, or in the roof, following best practice. Once safe, and it's been established that it's safe to take the load, the hoist is operated. It climbs up the chain out of the flight case, out of the container box, and up to working height. Then the load is attached. and sent up to trim, which is the design height that the load needs to be for the show, for the purposes of the show. At that point, any extra features will be added, for example, safeties. Then we obviously have the show. After the show, we prepare and lower the load, remove the load, lower the hoist into the boxes, and remove and lower the slings, and that's the de-rig process. So we're going to look at the tools and techniques. As a rigger, you need to possess the following tools and equipment. So first and foremost is your PPE. You need hard hat, boots, high-vis and gloves. Then you need your personal fall protection equipment, which is harnesses, your fall arrest lanyards, work positioning lanyards, energy absorbers, ASAP, scaff hooks. Then you need a rope and pulley, a laser dot for marking positions on the floor, and tapes and measures for measuring out on the floor as well. Also handy for jobs is wire cutters, spanners, lever hoist, clutch chain, climb tool. There is a list of gear that is useful for rigging. So for rigging projects, we use access equipment, MEWPs, towers, ladders, telescopes, rope ladders, rope access. And we use lifting equipment, chain hoists, forklifts, telehandlers, cranes, super lifts. And for these, we need our accessories, which are the slings, shackles, O-rings, etc. We also use wire for steel wire rope for suspension equipment, and we need terminations for those. On a regular basis, we use gripples or wire rope grips, and sometimes we use rutlingers, etc. Another thing we need is our structural equipment, which will be modular truss and scaffolding. So before we go on site, we need to ensure that calculations have been carried out to determine loads and forces. This includes in the support structure and in the load. We need to establish the safe working load of points and the forces at play throughout the load path. We also need to make sure that we have a plan produced detailing how the rigging system will work. This includes a rigging plot, details of the weight loads, equipment lists, schedules, and crew requirements. We need to make sure that all rigging points have been approved, and we need to get permissions to apply the proposed loads. When we get on site, we mark out using scaled drawings and using a datum. The datum needs to be established on site, and it's used as a setting out point in the venue where positions on the plan can be measured off from. It's important to take time and use precision at this point, because any changes that need to happen further down the road can be costly and can lead to dangerous situations. Then we need to select our equipment. We need to make sure that the equipment is strong enough, that it's suitable and appropriate for the proposed task, and that it's compatible in terms of fit, size, and safe working load. So some components, for example, the larger shackle pins won't fit into the crown of a stacked chain, and it will side load the links of the chain, which is bad practice. I'm just trying to catch up here on some of the slides. Sorry about this, folks. So also in terms of size, if you use a 1-ton shackle for a 1-ton sling. The sling will not physically fit into the 1-ton shackle because a 1-ton shackle is actually quite small. 2-ton hooks are the hooks on 2-ton hoists are quite large, so you need to use an extra large shackle. And then obviously you need to make sure that your safe working load is consistent right through the load path. So hoists, here we go, hoists. So there's many types of hoists. In entertainment, we use chain hoists. They come in different categories. So we've got D8 hoists, which is a single braked industrial hoist. We have D8 plus hoists, which are double braked, have the added safety feature. And then there's also intelligent hoists, which have load monitoring capacity. We use the capacities of hoists that we use are between 250 kilos and 2 tons. Hoists can be either single fall, where a single chain comes out of the hoist body with a hook on the end, or they can be double fall, where the chain comes out, goes through a pulley at the hook, and then back up to the hoist body. It's important when you're using double fall hoists that you don't rotate the hook through the chain and introduce twists into the chain. This can damage the load chain, and load chains are very expensive. Plus, it's also not safe. In entertainment rigging, we usually go with motor down, which means that the motor remains in the box and we send up the chain with the hook to the roof and make the connections. There's 2 reasons for that. Well, 2 main reasons for that. One is the manual handling. Hoist bodies are heavy, so the ideal thing is that it gets taken off the truck in a flight case on wheels, down a ramp, over across the floor to where it's needed. The lid is opened and you just send up the hook, and then the hoist body itself then climbs the chain, and it reduces the amount of manual handling there in that operation. The other reason is for cabling. To enable a speedy install and de-rig, cabling needs to be done from the ground. The cables are then led along truss lines and then dropped off where the power and control is. So hoists are marked up with a height of lift, which means that this is the operating height that the hoist operates in. So if you've got a 20-meter roof, you need a 20-meter height of lift hoist. Just a thing about trim height. Trim height is the height that we need to achieve for the design requirements of the show. When we're slinging hooks, when we're slinging the chain hooks, we need to make sure that it's at the right height so that the hoist can get to the trim height. Cables need to be secured without putting strain on the connections, and riggers need to know how to run cables properly and find faults in the system. All the cables go back to a controller. The hoist controller, you need to know how to use this. It needs to be marked up properly, and you need to be aware of the do's and don'ts when you're using this equipment, as there's nothing more dangerous than a person pressing the button. Finally, on hoists, we have the chain bags, which are designed to safely take over the spare chain, the excess chain. We have to be careful that the chain bags don't allow the chain to collect at the top of the bag, where it might spill out and pull the rest of the chain out of the bag and free fall to the floor, possibly on somebody's head. So slinging loads is a key rigging skill. We need to choose slings based on protecting against damage and for their capacity, their safe working load. Before we use the sling, we need to do a pre-use check to make sure that it's still in usable condition. We need to observe the sling angles and mode factors so that we don't reduce the capacity of the sling. When we're slinging loads, we need to make sure that the load doesn't rotate. And we have to protect the load from the sling. And we also need to protect the sling from the load. Especially sharp edges, like on I-beams, we need to use softening, burlap. It increases the radius of the angle. Secondary suspensions are recommended for use with all suspended loads, unless you have other safety features. Most venues and licensing authorities have a policy on the use of safeties or secondary suspensions. If there's no policy, then decisions have to be made by a competent person. Secondary suspensions are subject to risk assessment, correct installation, and you need to minimize the fall to less than 150 millimeters. In the event of a fall, the load must not be allowed to capsize, rotate, or swing when it comes under the load of the secondary suspension. Each venue is different. They often have their own rules and codes of practice. These need to be known and incorporated into any planned use. So we have to get equipment up to height. Getting equipment up to height needs to be risk assessed. We can use goods lifts or catwalks, stairs, MEWPs, which are mobile elevated work platforms. We can use hoists or winches, or the good old-fashioned rope or hauling line. And getting work down from height also needs to be assessed. You should never drop equipment or throw it from height, and you always need to control the descent of equipment. Another key skill for riggers is problem solving, because changes happen all the time on jobs. Before you rush into changes, you need to assess the situation and the requirements. Rushing into changes will lead to dangerous situations. You need to notify a supervisor, and in some cases you need to refer to a competent person like an engineer or a venue agent to make sure that the changes you are planning are achievable. The next step in the process is de-rigging. So de-rigging presents different risks than the installation. Generally, you have less time, crews are tired, you've got other crews working around in the same area. There's tight deadlines to reach, like if touring trucks have to reach ferries. Light levels can be low, and generally there's a lot of equipment moving around, and there's trucks coming and going as well. In this situation, care needs to be taken when lowering loads, and only when the area is clear. And then finally, you need to clear the site. So you need to ensure that there's no residual risks left on site, and no loose equipment left at height. So checks have to be made. All of these operations require supervision. Supervisor needs to oversee the rigging operations, needs to make sure that the plan is being followed, needs to keep to the production schedule and observe house rules. This involves effective motivation of the rigging team, good delegation of tasks, a sound product knowledge, and good technical knowledge. Skills for a supervisor include good team working skills and good communication skills. For all of these operations, communication is very important. Uh, there are certain things that will reduce good communication, including distance, ambient noise, and believe me, the setup of touring shows is very noisy, obstructions to sight lines, a lack of protocol, language barrier, ambiguity and disability, and also a lack of knowledge. We try to use radios as much as possible, but obviously sometimes that's not suitable because you can't guard against dropping items. So all of this needs to be risk assessed. So we come to working at height, which is what we have to do all of these operations. So we need to know the legislation covering working at height and the legislation covering PPE, lifting operations, and the provision and use of work equipment. Our working at height regulations stipulate that all work must be properly planned and organized. We need to take into account weather conditions. We need to be trained and competent. The place where we work at height has to be safe. All our equipment needs to be inspected, and the risk from fragile surfaces and falling objects needs to be controlled. There's a hierarchy of controls that we use with working at height. The first one is to avoid working at height, if practically possible. The second one is to prevent working at height through collective means like handrails. And the third one is to mitigate the risks involved with a fall from height. All working at height needs to be subject to a risk assessment and method statement. Doing this properly should inform you of the most suitable means of access. So there's specific hazards that are associated with working at height. They include falls from height, falling objects, failure or collapse of access equipment, fragile surfaces, misuse of PPE, using incorrect equipment, having untrained staff using equipment, overloading access equipment, difficult rescue procedures, exhaust from plant or equipment, overloading floors, and overturning equipment or plant. And there are at-risk groups as well. Most at-risk groups, there's the young and the inexperienced, and people with conditions or disabilities are at risk, at more risk than others. So before the use of any access equipment, we need to look at doing a site assessment. So we need to look at the location and the accessibility, the ground conditions and loadings, the height and reach that you're required to get to, obstacles and obstructions, overhead hazards, access restrictions, weather, and the operating of envelope of available equipment, which means that if someone says to you, oh, that's grand, we have a machine here that will do the job, and when you get on site, you find that it actually won't reach where you need to go, so you need to check that out as well. Another thing about working at height is rescue procedures. So rescue procedures are required for all work at height. This includes a rescue plan, a rescue crew, and rescue kit. So access equipment, we're going to look at access equipment now. So we have our fixed ladders and catwalks. We have fixed platforms, for example, grids above theatres or in arenas. We use MEWPs. We can use access towers or scaffolding, ladders, taller scopes, rope ladders, and rope access. All require training. All require inspection regimes and record keeping. Suppliers' information should be available for all of them. They should be risk assessed, only operated by trained and competent people, and used in line with guidance and best practice. So PPE is needed for all work at height. This is your personal fall protection equipment. These systems include fall arrest, work restraint, work positioning, rope access, and rescue systems. The equipment that's required for these is your harnesses, and you need to have the correct type of harness. A fall arrest harness is not suitable for rigging. A fall arrest harness is a secondary backup device which should stop your fall in the event that your work platform and your handrail is not effective. Whereas in rigging, your harness is quite often your primary source of protection. So you need to get the right type of harness and the right type of lanyards and connections for the use of this. In the event of a fall in a harness, there's a thing called suspension trauma, and depending on the type of harness, the quicker this will set in. So a rescue from a fall at height is very important and needs to be timely. It needs to be understood by all the crew and yes, and it needs to be properly risk assessed. And then we have personal fall protection systems. Some of these can be permanent installations. For example, in arena roofs, you can have latchway systems and fixed catenaries. And then you can have temporary systems in stage roofs where you have lifelines on towers and in roofs, or on rope access jobs. The use of all of these requires training and requires the proper use. The manufacturer's instructions should be available for all of these, and maintenance records. They're subject to regular inspection regimes and record keeping, and any defects need to be reported straight away to the supervisor or to the venue or to the service provider. So that's the tools and techniques and roles and responsibilities. The challenges we face as riggers is, from a management point of view, we have a limited supply of riggers that are competent, dependable, and customer facing. The ones we have tick all those boxes. But when we get involved in projects where we have to supply a large number of riggers at the same time to an indoor show, to an outdoor show, and to trade shows and other clients, the riggers can get quite thin on the ground. So finding suitable characters to come into the business is difficult, and providing consistent work is difficult. So it tends to be feast and famine. Summer times it's very busy. Winter it's not so busy, or depending on indoor shows. So as riggers, you can be both underworked and overworked. So routes into the industry. My advice for anyone looking to get into the industry is to register as a rigging trainee with the NRC scheme. It is through that scheme that you can log all your experiences, and you can start your journey on the traineeship path. Then you need to get your statutory tickets, which are the Safe Pass, Working at Heights, and Manual Handling tickets. You need to be available and be willing to travel. And I would advise you need something to fall back on when it's quiet. You will find opportunities for employment through rigging companies. You could look in theatres and venues as well. One route could be to join an agency, a job agency, but ensure that any rigging work you do is your own business. I'd advise you to ask the right questions and record all your experiences, no matter how insignificant. So I'm just going to go through our top 10 hints here. So my first tip is know your job. Know the do's and don'ts. Understand the regulations. Know the tools and techniques. And know your equipment, its uses and its limitations. Understand plant operations and what capacity certain plant has. Gain as much site knowledge as you can for the different places that we work. Identify hazards and risks as you go along. Learn best practice and use best practice. Try and acquire as much industry knowledge as you can. And always admit to your lack of knowledge or understanding, because that's how you learn something, and it will stop unsafe situations happening for yourself and for the team. And also admit to your mistakes as you learn something. The second tip is work safely. So respect your equipment. Your equipment will save your life. So inspect it, log the inspections, store it properly, and upgrade it when it needs upgrading. Respect yourself, keep fit, recognize your abilities, and get enough sleep. Respect other people and look out for them. Read your RAMs, understand them, and sign up to them. Ask any questions that you need to clarify any issues. And then you need to comply with company regulations or requirements. And you also need to comply with venue or site requirements. The next one is turn up on time. So you're part of a team, and as part of a team, if you're late, then the team will not function properly, and the whole project will not progress in the way that it's designed to progress. So if you're asked to be on stage for 8 o'clock, it doesn't mean that you're pulling into the car park at 8 o'clock or down the road in traffic 5 minutes away at 8 o'clock. In fact, it's always better to be there earlier than the allotted time, because that's when you get to actually understand the project and the plan. If you arrive late, you're already stressed. You're not in the situation where the project is being explained to you, and your supervisor is stressed, plus your workmates. So arrive on time, turn up for work with the correct equipment. There's no point in having the harness in your car when you're required to work up on the roof in the 3 arena. So turn up with your harness, with the right equipment and all your tools. Be customer facing. So you need to be amenable to the client. You need to be polite to the client, and you need to be presentable. Be dependable and consistent, because 100% this will get you more work. If you're not dependable and if you're not consistent, the person that is will get the phone call first. So work is for work, not talking, smoking, and drinking tea. If you do a lot of that, and if you're not attending to your work, 100% you will get less work. And break time is allotted for a reason. And again, observe the times for break time. If you're not present, then as part of a team, the team won't operate properly. My fourth tip is attend to your work. So watch and learn. Pick up the tips Follow best practice. Never leave other people in the proverbial. Complete your work. Your work includes counting and loading trucks. Monitor lifting operations. So if you're operating controllers, watch what the load is doing. If you can't see it, get a spotter. But always monitor any lifting operations. If you're given charge of an MEWP or other piece of kit, ensure that you park it correctly in a safe way, that you charge it, that it's on charge. And for supervisors, you need to supervise effectively. The fifth tip is follow the task. So first of all, you need task clarity. Thank you. So the task needs to be allocated, it needs to be delegated and explained. So communication is very important. Do not deviate from the task. If you deviate from the task and change the design, under CDM regulations, construction design and management regulations, you become the designer. The liability ends with you. You are the designer. So do not deviate from the task or the design. If you do need to deviate from the task or the design, you need to get clearance. The task needs to be managed properly, so you need to make sure you have the right materials and tools to complete your task. And the task also includes wrapping up gear properly and counting and loading. The gear is designed to be used again and again for different productions, so the gear needs to be in a state that it was found in when you originally started using it, so that it can be used again easily without someone going back over and clearing up and cleaning up. So the sixth tip is help other people. So pass on your knowledge. Assist trainees, show them how to do jobs. Assist clients to the best of your ability. Be part of the team. Look out for your co-workers, and especially look out for third parties, because they do not know what is going on. So you need to be aware of third parties and you need to make allowances. If a third party comes onto site, you need to stop what you're doing and alert them that something dangerous is happening in their vicinity. So the seventh tip is improve yourself. So knowledge, there's always something to learn, even if it's not how to do something. So you need to know your craft. You need to improve your knowledge about equipment. You need to improve your knowledge about processes and procedures and regulations. You need to look at improving your performance, see how you can do something better the next time, so how you can do it quicker. And you need to use hindsight for all of this. Number 8, which is very close to my heart, is reporting issues. So if you've got a piece of kit that's not working, don't just cast it aside in the corner and carry on. You need to let the supervisor know, because that piece of a kit is vital. If it's not charging properly, if you can't get to a plug, your MEWP will be flat when it's needed to be used the next day, and the work cannot be completed. So you need to report any issues, including equipment, any plant issues, any personal problems relating to your work or task. You need to let your supervisor know. Any problems with the task, if you can't do your task or complete your task, then you need to let your supervisor know. Any issues with the venue, you need to let the venue or the supervisor know. And any overall safety issues, they need to be reported. Reporting is a legal responsibility and obligation, so you need to report accidents and incidents. This may save your life down the road, and it may save your co-workers' lives down the road. Number 9 is be measured. So be objective. Like, we all have been in situations where it's gone to shit. So what we need to do is look at it objectively and work out a plan on how to get out of it. So we need to value advice. So take on board good advice, review the advice you're getting and check whether it's good or bad. And we need to use the correct forums for communicating and for passing on problems or issues or suggestions. Use the appropriate language. Temper your temper. So don't lose the head. There's nothing more embarrassing than watching someone lose the head over something that's actually quite a minor issue. Recognize the filters that people have and work with that. Recognize your own filters and try and improve them. Gauge the situation, so look around. Don't just be inward looking, but look around and check out what the overall situation is. And don't engage in gossip. Gossip is hurtful and it's not helpful. So number 10 is communication. So you need to communicate clearly. You need to know what questions to ask, and you need to know when you're giving the answers that they're the right answers. You need to give timely answers. So if you're receiving emails, you need to give a timely answer, or texts or whatever. So never assume you know everything. So listen to instructions and listen to your head. So I'm going to just shoot through all of these slides, which I was supposed to be progressing through here. Sorry about this. My slide management has been absolutely abysmal. These are photographs which have been taken by riggers on rigging jobs. And some of them give some good insight into the situations that we are in and find ourselves in, and the sorts of projects that we engage in. So I will just go through them, let you have a quick look at these before we get to our final slide, which is go home safe. And thank you very much. So that's the end of my presentation, Mark.
Super, thank you very much. There's a whistle-stop tour of all the bits and bobs involved. One of the things I've always thought, working on gigs, and working on events, especially complicated shows with lots of rigging, is the riggers, more so than a lot of other functions, have the capacity, if they're not on top of their game, to at the very least cause issues and problems, but actually cause, from my perspective, cause risks to others and cause danger on site as well. So I think a lot of your points are very well made, that the importance of what riggers do on shows, from a safety perspective, just from the point of view of the impact they can have on other people, is significant. And I always thought that the risk of stuff dropping from riggers to the ground, so whether that's a tool or a phone out of a pocket or anything, I've always thought that must be one of the highest risk elements of what you guys do, aside completely from the function you're performing, literally just being that high above others potentially working on the stage, and stuff falling. Is that as big a risk as my safety brain tells me it is, or are there simple systems and procedures you use to not have loose things like that could fall?
Yes, it is as big a risk as you think. There are policies for working overhead, that you don't carry loose items in your pockets, that anything that you're carrying has a safety lanyard or is stowed in a zipped pocket or whatever, or a bolt bag. When when we're making up slings, we quite often have loose items in our hands. So it's important, it's important that the job is done in a safe and measured way, and that everyone's tasks is understood. Like if there's a rigger up there making a bridle in the roof, the last thing you need is someone coming along and shaking the chain or swinging out of the chain, because it will just pull everything out of the rigger's hands. There are occasions where items have been dropped out of roofs. We've all experienced that, and it's just part and parcel of the type of work that we do. We need to police the area underneath where people are working when they do have loose items. So the grounder needs to keep other people back out of the area, and people should be wearing the correct grade of hard hats when they're working in an environment like that, because obviously the item might drop, but it might bounce off other items and go in a diagonal direction.
Yeah, it's something. Another thing that's always struck me was that, given the transient nature in our industry in general, I've always thought that riggers and a rigging team are one of those functions that I really do want to be seeing the same faces working together all the time, because from what I understand of it, so much can depend on teamwork and that kind of mutual understanding of each person's operation and how it affects the next person, which is why I've always thought of it again as a risky element, considering how the industry works. And as you said, it can be feast or famine. So you could do a summer season with a lot of the same team members together, but then maybe a few jobs at the same time, overstretching, trying to get more people. Are they familiar with each other? How one another works? From your perspective, how is it ideally if you can keep the same teams working together, maybe irrespective of the job or the challenge, but if it's the same people and they understand how one another works and what's involved in each function? Is that important, or can good riggers just kind of slot into a good team?
No, it's absolutely important. When a good team is working together efficiently and well, it's a very good situation. If we start getting people in who are disruptive or not competent or don't turn up, then that's a difficulty as well. But generally, a good, well-experienced and competent rigger will slot into a good team wherever they go.
Okay, so you reckon, like at a certain level, or kind of a certain level of experience, you'd expect that everyone is operating kind of to best practice and good standards, and that you get a load of people together for one big show, that they can all work together and understand the functions. One of the questions that came in early on actually was, who approves the rigging points beforehand and on site, or if there's a difference? So who actually decides where things are getting hung from?
Okay, the positions are a design function. So the position of where the hoists are going to be is for the show, for the purposes of the show, and the points, who approves the points, it will be the venue provider.
Okay.
Yeah, or the supplier of the stage roof. And quite often then we use modular systems like truss to achieve points, and the manufacturer's information is readily available for all truss. They're called loading tables, and we ourselves can figure out the load capacity of truss elements and structural elements. At the top would be the engineer.
Okay.
If there's ambiguity as to, if there's no information available for the structure, you need to get an engineer in who will assess the structure and give you that information. If it's a venue that's regularly used, they will have loading charts, they'll have load scenarios, and that information will be provided. It can be marked actually on the beams and stuff, but it's available through the venue and through the client and through the venue.
Okay, So that kind of answers maybe the next question, which was someone had asked, how does one determine if the roof or ceiling can take a max weight? So in that situation, if you're going into a standard venue or someone supplying you with that roof, they supply you with calculations on these are the fixed points, they can take these weights. And as you said, then if you need to achieve other points, that's normally where trust comes in. But does that mean you're relying kind of that someone else has done their job well or knows what they're doing, and you're going off kind of them saying this can take that weight, this point can take that weight? Or do you guys have a way of testing it there and then, or do you just go by that plan that you're given?
Well, yes, you can load test points, but generally that's not suitable if you're there to put a show in. You can't just rock up and start putting weight onto the point and saying, yeah, that's okay, or no, that's not okay. So your engineer will assess it in advance if the information's not available. So, yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does. I suppose from my perspective, I'm always wondering where does the third party come in? Where do you suddenly have to trust someone else? But as you said, if you're wondering at all, or if you're told something takes such and such a load, and you're thinking, not in my experience, it wouldn't. You do have that option. Then that's when you'll kind of query something or call a halt, get an engineer to actually, maybe your own engineer or whatever, to figure that one out for you. But again, if you're going to regular venues, I guess this is their business to know this stuff and be getting it right. Otherwise, things go wrong and shows don't come back, I guess.
Well, absolutely. I mean, otherwise nothing will get insured.
Chris is wondering who supplies the load tests and charts. So I think you had mentioned that there are charts you can get.
Okay, manufacturers and suppliers will provide charts for modular equipment.
Okay.
Or permanently installed equipment. Load tests can be arranged through various different companies, and an engineer will then provide any other estimations that are required.
Thanks, Drew. Sorry, I'm dealing with a 3-year-old.
I can see that, yeah.
She was very shy at the start of all these webinars, and in the last few weeks she's been making regular appearances.
Very good.
So again, another question that's just, what paperwork should you get from a rigger in advance? So is there a rigger's ticket? Should there be method statement, insurance policy? So I guess you went through some of that from the paperwork, but from the actual person, so that the actual responsible rigger, is there something individually like that safe pass that each of them would have to show or could be asked to show? Or if it's brought in through a company like ACTAVO, are you just kind of expecting that they're giving you good people who know what they're doing, or can the individual kind of be checked, if you get me?
Yeah, well, if you're working on any construction site, you're required to have a safe pass. If you're working on productions, it's not necessary, possibly, but you should have a safe pass so that it shows that you're trained within, on the health and safety legislation. You should have a working at height ticket, working at height ticket if you're working at height. You should have a manual handling ticket for any work that you're doing. Proof of competency for riggers. You see, the NRC is quite a new scheme. Okay. It's only 5 years or so, maybe a bit longer. The take-up of it hasn't been great. There's only a handful of level 3 riggers in this country, and there's maybe not that many more level 2 riggers. There's quite a few in the trainee scheme. So it's difficult to establish competency based on what tickets are available to be had by a rigger or to be carried by a rigger.
Okay, that's interesting. I suppose when the people maybe checking up on paperwork, it's good to know kind of the breadth of stuff you can ask for and should expect. But again, as you said, if there aren't that many that could currently show that competence anyway, just by the way the way the industry is, it can be a tough one. Paul, Paul Griffin is wondering, can you talk through some of the photos in the presentation? He must have some favorite photos in there that he wants to just be discussed. Actually, before we get to that, there was one thing I had made a note of, and Donald is kind of asking about now. You spoke briefly about rescues and not leaving people kind of dangling for long, that kind of stuff. From a rescue perspective, I'll get to Donald's question in a second. One thing I was wondering, who affects the rescue? Is that on, like, is it that other riggers would be doing that rescue then? Like, it's not like calling in search and rescue people or dialing 999. That's a situation where other riggers on that job will be attempting that rescue, is it?
Correct, yeah. So okay. we would appoint a rescue team. So there'd be the rescuer and the backup rescuer. And generally, yes, we assess where the work is happening and what the means of rescue would be, whether it's getting a ladder up to the position or using an MEWP or accessing the position from above. We have rescue kits. Once the stricken person is connected to the rescue kit, they can be hoisted up so that they're removed from their lanyards and then lowered to the ground or hoisted up to a position where they can be looked after.
Okay, so that's interesting. So on a job, there will be specifically people designated as the rescuers, and obviously then a backup in case it's the rescuer themselves that needs rescuing, I guess.
Correct, yeah. We would have, on our rigging teams, we'd have a proportion of errata rope access guys.
Okay.
And as part of their operations and their training, they have rescue training as part of their training. We do rescue training as well, but it's difficult to recreate situations.
Yeah, it's one of those things where they're hard to practice and you hope you never have to do in the real world.
100%.
Yeah. Sorry, Donald's point just on the rescue thing is he says rescue plans are seldom set out in the RAMs, in particular as rigging teams are only assembled from gig to gig.
Yeah, there should be a separate rescue plan.
Okay. So again, I guess that the point there, I suppose, is that we've acknowledged that quite often, again, the feast or famine thing, quite often you can have people kind of either running from job to job, or people are so busy, you're kind of assembling a team that maybe aren't as familiar with each other. So I guess then Donald has seen times when rescue plans maybe aren't as forthcoming because, again, you might not know who you have on a job till quite late in the day, as you know yourself, and you might know who you want, and if you get them, you know the rescue plan you'd be able to put together. But again, you can be maybe waiting to confirm them before, and they could be critical for that rescue plan. I mean, I assume it's not that everyone on a rigging team could be put into those rescue roles. You know, there'd be training and experience. So there's probably key people from a rescue perspective are near the top of the list each time you're trying to put a team together and go, I definitely want them on that job because they'll be able to do that for me if needs be.
Correct, yes.
Brandon is asking, what about rigging standards and competence internationally? So is it a case that much like some of what we would do, that a lot of it is UK based, or are there better standards anywhere else around the world? Are there better schemes anywhere? Or is it all kind of coming out of the UK?
In terms of standards, we're all working to European standards.
Okay.
Yeah, so they should be all combined and part of the same mix. Internationally, I've never worked in the States, so I don't have experience in other jurisdictions. Competence-wise, the NRC is recognized worldwide.
Oh, okay. So
it's
again,
recognized by the ETCP, which is the American rigging qualification and competency scheme. And there's a lot of riggers worldwide who travel to the UK and do the scheme. So there's a register on the NRC website which will detail all the riggers that have that hold the different tickets. So you can check out who you're using and whether they're whether they're part of that. And in the past, I've had several job offers from UK companies and other companies purely because I'm on that register.
Right. So again, as you said, while it's quite young as a scheme and a register, that even that can be done is quite important. We often get it questioned about the safety officer and the type of work we do. People going, is there somewhere where I can go and check, who's qualified to what level? And unfortunately there isn't really. So having something like that, again, even if it's a 5 or 6 year old scheme, with time, hopefully, that can develop and thrive, because being able to check something like that would be extremely helpful in every corner of what we do, I guess.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's a useful resource.
One of the things you mentioned was about, that there are people who would work at height, there are people who would work on the ground. Are there set roles then in the team, or can you have someone who can go up, can stay on the ground, or are these kind of very specialized areas and people tend to be one or the other kind of thing?
Well, the route a trainee would take would be to start on the ground.
Okay.
So the ideal situation is that everyone who's up in the air has spent time on the ground and understands the job from that perspective. It would be ideal that everyone who works on the ground has spent some time in the air, but some people don't like working at heights. Some people just present themselves as only grounders, which is fair enough. It's very good to have someone who's doing it all the time and is quick and understands the situation.
My 3-year-old is getting smarter by the webinar and has now decided when she knows she shouldn't talk to me, that's when to get me to agree to stuff. So apparently, after my webinar, we have to go and buy her a unicorn balloon. That's what I've just had to agree to. Okay, I'll do what I often do around this time on the webinars and just suggest that if anyone has any last-minute burning questions, throw them in there. I have a few I took note of that I can refer to now just to keep going for a couple of minutes. And if anyone has anything they really want to ask, shout. I'm going to turn on that functionality where you can request to speak if anyone does want to jump on and turn their mic on and talk to us. Many riggers work freelance. Are there any specific insurances to look out for, given the levels of risk involved, or would those activities be covered under standard public liability? So that's Chris. He's talking about the fact that many riggers work freelance. So what kind of insurance is involved then that people can be kind of checking on, or would it all come under a company's public liability? If you're bringing in freelancers to your team, do they have separate insurance, or do they come under ACTAVO then at that point?
We insure people who work for us as long as they're not providing equipment.
Okay.
As a freelancer, you're always better off having your own insurance because you don't want to lose your house or whatever possessions you have. So public liability, yes, you need to detail with the insurance companies that you're working at height, and they will ask you then what height you're working to and what your competencies are.
Right, and that's for you as a freelancer, say, to get your own insurance and make sure you're covered for what you'll be doing.
Absolutely, yes. Now, it used to be the case that there was an insurance company in the UK that covered through a scheme called crew cover, that they covered people working in other EU jurisdictions. And if you checked with the central bank and the financial operations register there, they actually were allowed to do that. That has stopped. They do not offer that cover anymore to people in Ireland or the rest of Europe. Another source of insurance was BEC2, which is the British Film Union, which the film riggers are allied to. BEC2 insurance does not cover you in this jurisdiction either, and never has.
Oh, okay.
So insurance is expensive, but you need to make sure that you're getting, if you are getting insurance, that it's actually covering you.
Yeah, there's no point
Yeah,
getting
because
insurance and not being covered for what you're actually
exactly.
doing just to save on a
Yeah.
premium. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's it's a waste of money, and it'll lead you to confidence that's ill-founded.
It's funny, you mentioned the freelancers and that, say, for instance, as an example, ACTAVO would cover them if they're not supplying equipment. One of the other questions that was sent to me, I think it was sent privately, actually, I don't see it in the chat earlier, was just around equipment. Are there life cycles on each element of equipment, or is it a case of testing annually or whatever to make sure things are still good, or do certain hoists or certain slings last a certain length of time and then they have to be gotten rid of and replaced, or how does that work?
Yeah, there's a shelf life on fabric or fiber elements. For example, your harnesses have a 10-year shelf life and a 5-year working life.
Okay.
Polyester slings, they're affected by UV degradation, so they need to be replaced. Metal objects, because of their nature, have a much longer life. So hoists and machinery, they have a life based on duty cycle. So an industrial hoist in a factory or in a industrial setting will stop and start possibly several hundred times a day and move loads up and down a lot. An entertainment hoist generally stops and starts maybe 2 or 3 times a day.
Okay.
So to reach the duty cycle for an entertainment hoist, you're talking hundreds of years. But they are all, and every piece of equipment you use has to be inspected on a periodic basis, which is all detailed in the regulations.
Okay, so again, it's a bit of both. Some things have the shelf life, but they're all subject to testing periodically anyway.
Absolutely, yes. Now the testing is generally, I see her there behind you.
Yeah, there's her head popping up.
Yeah, popping up. Yeah,
the
it's
orientation of my table isn't what it used to be, so I think she's annoyed the couch isn't as easy.
Hello.
Charlie, you want to say hello?
Hello.
Say hello.
Yeah.
So again, it's a mix of testing and shelf life then in general, but obviously things with fibers and stuff are going to have, and they'll be subject to degradation as well as having a shelf
life. Absolutely. But everything we use for rigging needs to be tested before each use, because your inspection will only tell you that it's good at the time of the inspection.
Yeah.
That could have been 6 months ago or a year ago. And it could have been on tour, being misused by all sorts of people. And you could open up a box and find the stuff is in rag order.
Yeah.
So
you're testing everything before it goes out on a job.
Yep. You're doing a pre-use check, yes.
Okay. Very good.
Now,
well, that's good to know.
Like you wouldn't be checking that the hoists. I mean, if you notice something that's flawed, or if there's a safety catch broken, grand, but you would be going down checking each link of the chain.
No.
Do you know what I mean?
You're checking a certain level of stuff to have the confidence that you can send it out, knowing that other things would be caught on site then maybe if they spotted something. Mm-hmm. Larry has a question. I'm not sure this is as easy to answer as it is to ask, but we'll put it to you anyway. Typically, how many days does it take to set up a simple stage for a small rock band? Is there a rule of thumb to work it out? Now, I think there's probably so many moving parts that simple stage for a small rock band is probably, how long is a piece of string, is it?
Okay, so a medium stage like the tunnel roof, which we put into the Trinity Summer Series in Trinity College.
Okay, so decent size, decent crowd size, yeah.
Yeah, that takes 2 days to install. There's a day for snagging, during which time production can be loading in. And then once all the production elements are in, then the show can go on ahead. The production elements get de-rigged that night, and the stage can be taken down the next day. So it depends on the size of the stage. You know, for a small stage, we could have it up in a couple of hours.
Okay. And again, of course, it depends. The stage size could be one thing, but then I guess the intricacy of whatever they need hung for a specific act could be the difference as well. The stage could be
Oh,
exactly the
absolutely.
same, but depending on what needs to be hung and what they have working, it can make a massive difference.
Well, there's two different elements to this, Mark, because the stage building project is different to the rigging project.
Yeah.
So I could answer both because I'm involved in both, but they are two different sides of the same coin.
Chris has something here. I don't know, is he asking this or telling us this, but he says, just as regards the drawings, he's either saying he's having problems finding people or a company to do grid drawings, or he's asking, do you have problems finding people to do those plots of points? I mean, I assume, you guys have an internal team, do you, that would do the plotting of all that stuff for you to take to site then and deliver?
Absolutely, yeah. We have our own internal design department.
So again, it could be that Chris is saying maybe even if you're a freelancer or something, that it's hard to get, people to actually do that plotting for you to then work too. Maybe that's what he's saying. Chris, if you want to jump in and let us know. I think there's a few Chris's having conversations there who may be solving that problem for themselves actually. Okay, cool. Give me what I just fly through anything else that had come in. We did. We've answered that. We answered the lifeline thing. So, as a matter of interest, one query I had, you mentioned it earlier on, when you do the plot and you put it on the ground, and you said you lift the rig then to working at height, so you can attach stuff while on the ground, I presume is what's involved there. What height do you actually raise that stuff to so people are standing fitting it? As a matter of, this is just a nerdy question from me. What height is considered that height, if you get me, to pull the truss up so we can attach stuff? Is there a range there, or is there a set height, or what is it?
Well, it's basically you want to sling the load as well as you can using the slings. So you're going to have a certain amount of height between your hoist and your load. So if the load is a length of truss, if it's a touring length of truss, it generally will come with all the lights pre-rigged underneath it and a set of wheels. So they wheel the whole thing out, and they have the slings already attached to the truss, and it's just a question of throwing a shackle on and attaching the hoist. If it's a one-off job, then you're going to be generally pulling the truss up from the ground. The truss gets built on the ground. You put your sling on and you lower the hoist down to your sling, and then you pull it up. You raise it up to height where then you need to add in your production elements, your lighting or your projectors or whatever else you need.
Okay, so rather than a set height, that's kind of a common sense thing. You might have a load of tall people doing it or a load of short people doing it. It's just to get it to a height everyone's comfortable lifting and adding things onto before it's raised to the roof, I guess.
Well, the ideal situation is where you don't need to lift anything.
Okay.
So, if the floor takes the weight on everything, the hoist operates up and down, picks up what it needs to, brings it up to the next height. If it's a length of truss and you're adding a projector, then you lower it down onto the projector, connect the projector, and then lift the projector out of the box. Obviously, that's not all.
Yeah. You're minimizing manual handling as much as you can, and
Absolutely.
using the automated systems to do the work for you.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, Chris has jumped back in to say, yes, sorry, I'm having problems finding people to do the plotting. So that's Chris's current experience. Again, I think the other Chris might be helping him out by the look of things. I think we've had two more. Solomon just wanted to check as regards the insurance when you mentioned, and again, as an example, that ACTAVO could cover freelancers as long as they're not providing equipment.
Right. No.
Do you see what he's asking there?
Yeah. Okay. So freelancers should have their own insurance. Okay. A fallback situation, we are covered.
Okay. Fair enough. So it's about,
to go back to Chris. If Chris wants to contact us, and if we can assist on any of the design stuff, let us know. But sorry, I interrupted you there, Mark. Go on.
No, you're fine. I think that's good, Chris. I would take them up on that and pick some brains there if it suits you. And Solomon, I think that's the answer really, is that freelancers should have their own insurance one way or the other. But again, I think the distinction between plant equipment versus their own personal rigging gear would probably be important at that point. I don't think it's not like, I guess Drew and his team won't have inspected your rigging gear if you're a freelancer. Chris, rigging outside, how do you know how or when to go ahead with rain and risks affecting stage builds and stuff? Have you guys wind management plans and things like that, or is it a real experience thing and you go, I'm not going up in this?
Absolutely. We have wind management plans, and any temporary structure will require a wind monitoring device called an anemometer. So the anemometer, when winds approach dangerous levels, wind speed readings are taken, and plans are set in place at certain levels of wind speed to mitigate against the problems caused by wind and other environmental factors.
Okay, yeah, I suppose that makes perfect sense. Again, you're not going to be it's a dangerous enough function as it is. You don't want to be trying to do it in particularly dangerous conditions that make it even harder to do. I wonder, I'd say we're finishing up question-wise, I think. I wonder, is it worth coming back to Paul's request about maybe jumping back into the slides, and if there were a couple of the pictures, some of those pictures were quite interesting. I wonder, is it worth flying through, and there might be a couple that you might have a story about, or worth talking us through, or saying what job it is. I think some of those were just kind of fascinating. We're back at the back. Actually, that might suit us starting at the back, because a lot of those really good pictures, I think, were near the... You shout now if any of the... What is going on there?
Okay, this one here.
That's real, is it? That's real life, or that's a... Yeah.
That's real life. That's a job I did for Maxim for Milwaukee Tools in City West, and that's an LED floor.
Okay.
And also there's LED screens to the right and left as well, and all the way to the corner there. So the whole thing is an LED wall.
Is that suspended? Is that hanging?
Oh, the LEDs are. The stage is actually supported on a truss structure that we built.
Ah, okay. It is high though. So it's at a height.
It is high, yes.
The picture was just throwing me. Yeah, okay. Very good.
It's designed for whoever's on the stage is at the same height as the people on the balcony.
Ah, oh God, sorry, thinking of City West as a venue, that's reasonably high.
It is, yeah. So what you're standing, the camera there is from the point of view of being on the balcony in the center of the room, looking down towards the loading doors.
And what kind of activity was on that stage then? Was there like kind of...
Okay, so they... Once it was installed, we took away the handrail and installed a thin wire handrail, and a presenter was up on the stage giving a presentation to people on the balcony. Ah,
okay, very good. Oh, specifically oriented to the balcony.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Very good.
Yeah. It was for Milwaukee Tools for their European agents.
I tell you what, had we not done this now, I'd never have guessed that was City West and that was suspended.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's a brilliant photo. Okay, now what is going on here?
Okay, this is Slane Castle. The rigger on the left is carrying a rope over his shoulder, Garth, and he's at the backstage area there. Is he backstage or front stage? I'm not sure, but anyway, it's just three views of the rig in different stages.
Now, for those of us who aren't riggers, that to us looks like a massive build, lots going on, quite complicated, lots of truss. In your world, how does that set up compared to the types of jobs you typically do? I mean, is that on the upper end of complexity and build and everything, or would that be quite standard for for busy riggers?
That would be quite standard for busy riggers. These sort of rigs are designed to be simplified.
Okay.
So if you look in the center picture there where you see the line arrays
Yeah.
hanging, generally what you're doing is you're hooking into a specific point in the structure that's been welded in there. So you have an eye up there that you just hook into. So you're not actually involved in slinging loads as such. You're just getting a hook chain up to height and attached. Obviously, there is slinging involved all over the structure, but yeah, it's designed for quick install, quick production install, and de-rig.
I think it's fascinating to look like, again, for people who don't do this stuff, to look at something like that and hear you talk about that, how that is designed for quick install and everything. And again, they do need to be, because the longer these things take, the more dangerous they are in theory, and the more they're costing someone money. So, I mean, the systems are designed as well as they can be to...
No, stop there.
That's Crow Park, is it?
It is, yeah. So if you look up on the roof there, we have three truss structures up on the roof.
Ah, yes, I see them now, yeah.
And further back, there's a black and white picture of a guy lying on top, not lying on top, but working on top of one of those structures. There's a couple of photos around on this presentation. That's for Ireland's Fittest Families, the TV program.
Ah, yes. So they're actually doing something at that height, are they? And this is
yes.
This is what they'd be physically standing on, or that's keeping them safe up there. Yeah, okay.
That's right.
Well, that must have been an interesting one, because that's not a standard. Well, sorry, to my mind, looking at it, I doubt that stadium was designed with this type of thing in mind.
Oh, absolutely not. No. This is a situation where we needed to go to Michael, the engineer for Croke Park.
Yeah.
Give him our design and our proposal and the weight loadings, the imposed weight loadings. And he then had to turn around and say, yeah, I'm good with that. And then we were able to install.
So again, you could design the most amazing thing in the world, but ultimately someone has to decide that, well, where you want to put it, it will be safe and can take that kind of a load.
100%.
Yeah, and I mean, the top of the biggest capacity outdoor stadium in the country is an interesting place to be trying to build things. If you spot something here you want to talk about, by the way, please do. I'm just trying to
just go back again.
Interesting ones. Are
so this is Ireland's Fittest Families again.
Okay.
If you go to the slide just before, just after this
one?
Yeah, that one there. So that's a rig for contestants to walk out on. The blue ropes you see hanging at the end, they had to pull up the ropes, get the flags, and then go back. And they had to do it in relays. So there was 4 team members running out in relays, and believe me, they ran out. So above we have the cantilever truss sections as well, which were carrying tracks, and that track system was the safety system for the contestants that they got clipped into before they went out on the beams.
And what building is
that? One is
in Dublin?
That one is the Irish Life building in Dublin.
Very good.
So if you look at the front 2 legs, they come down, and if you see at the bottom of those or around the corner, you'll see what looks like rails.
Yeah.
So they're the old rails for the window cleaning cranes. That the old window cleaning crane. They're permanently there. That level there is the slab level of the building. It's the concrete slab. The legs going down onto those 2 rails, no problems with weights there. The back legs, on the other hand, are sitting on an asphalt roof with an allowable loading of 75 kilos per meter. We had close to...
Doesn't strike me like a lot.
2 ton.
Wow.
Yeah, we had close to about 2 ton on each of the 4 legs. So for that job, we had to underprop from the underneath the asphalt roof down to the slab underneath. So we also had the only access up to the roof level was, this is at the 9th story, and that flat roof is in the 10th story. The only access was a goods lift that went to the 7th floor. The longest piece of kit you could get into the goods lift was at 2 meters, and everything then had to be carried up the stairs. All of the long components, we had to build a winch, rope and pulley system out the back of the building, and pull all the decks up and all the long pieces of truss up. If you know the Irish Life building, it's full of that lovely gold glazing.
Yeah.
And I also had to put in place a method of keeping the loads on the ropes away from the building in case it was windy and they were looking to spin around and hit off the windows and break some very expensive glazing.
You don't want that, Bill.
No, and there was another photo earlier on of a guy on that roof on a tower when we were building it. The only window we had was to go in there at night and build it overnight over several nights.
So sorry, along with the little elements of complications you've already described, the goods lift, it only fitting things that were 2 meters, only been able to get to the 7th floor with the lift anyway, and then having to lift further, the weight loading on the asphalt. You're telling me you had to build it at night over consecutive nights?
Correct.
Okay, now that's got to be up there with one of the most interesting challenges, is it?
It was a very interesting challenge, yeah.
And did I understand right? Did you say you had to support, so under that asphalt roof, did you have to put support beneath that down to the floor below as well? So there's support there we can't see, is there?
Correct, yes. And
Right.
as you can see, all that cladding that's there, the copper cladding,
Yeah.
meant that you couldn't use your tape measure to find out how far you were from anything that related to the outside. So it was done blindly, but obviously through as much precise measurement as we needed to, and we got it bang on as well. There was actually no damage done to the roof, even though underneath the roof was a corrugated tin membrane. So we not only had to support that in several places with acro props, but we also had to put wooden fillets in to make sure that the corrugations weren't compressed.
Compressed or squeezed, yeah.
And then, as well as that, we had to bring up I-beams to put underneath the underpropping to spread the load on the slab.
That seems like an awful lot of work for one activity in that show, when I feel like someone in that show should have had a backup thing and went, no, actually, this is getting far too complicated. Let's do this other simpler thing instead. But they were obviously determined to make this one happen.
Correct, yeah.
I'd say it looks spectacular too. I'd say I'm going to press this button again. You shout at another one. I'd say we have time to maybe talk through one more interesting job if you want, before we let people go, because there were some fascinating photos.
That one there is, again, that's City West. That's a Facebook conference that we did for the last 2 years. That is a massive screen in the middle.
Yeah.
They're all three of them are LED screens.
Okay.
That screen in the middle we had to make we had to put a load of spreaders in the roof to spread the load between other beams in the roof. It was difficult to get any information from the engineer involved with that project, not the client engineers, but the venue engineers. Yeah. It was very difficult to get any sort of confirmation. So, so that was a massive, big, heavy screen.
So in a situation like that, when you're not getting that information from the original source, which is where you'd actually like it, obviously you guys do have ways then of going, right, that's not forthcoming. we still need to make this work. So we're going to have to figure this one out ourselves and spread that, as you said, spread that load to be safe.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. I think, do you know what? In hindsight, I think I think we could do a whole nother session of just going through each of the photos and talking about the challenges, because it's one of the things. I mean, Paul and I were briefly talking about even just the event we had at the weekend, where there were just 4 very simple, in your world, scaff structures is all that went in there. And again, from our perspective, we end up looking at things and figuring out things and everything. And I'm there looking at what's a very simple scaff tower with a cameraman on top of it, thinking I wouldn't even know where to start building that thing. And then we go through a presentation like this, when we see all the stuff you and the team have to figure out and try and make work, and do make work. I mean, some amazing things can happen if, as we always say about events, amazing things can happen, and they can be made safe and they can be done right if you have the right people involved and the right expertise and the right approach. Because I suppose we've all seen the other side of it too, where it's not done entirely right, and
Well,
it might
absolutely.
even look okay, but it won't be okay.
Absolutely. And I think quite often the drama that happens behind the event is sometimes more interesting than the event itself.
It can be, especially if you're in events and nerdy about what goes on behind the scenes. I think Fiona, I won't say your second name in case anyone's watching afterwards, but she goes, I found this really interesting. I work in a venue with a theatre, and our technicians have always been quite secretive about rigging and all things theatre. We have a fantastic new technician team who are happy to show me anything I ask. To be fair, like Drew, you tend to be quite forthcoming about stuff and easy to chat to about this type of thing. It is, I guess, traditionally in the industry, one of those areas that, nearly has been a little bit of a dark art. And if you know it and you do it, you're one of those people. And the rest of us are like, I have no idea. But if Drew or whoever tells me it's safe and it can be done, that's what they do. So I don't I don't understand a whole lot about the rigging side of things. It's interesting that Fiona has that in a theatre venue where it'd be a set team all the time. And even they had the impression of being, no, you don't need to understand this stuff. Just leave this stuff to us. I think it's one of the things that's happened a lot during we've said this.
Yeah, there's no quicker way of confirming your own knowledge than when you start trying to explain what you know to someone else.
Yeah, that's true. And again, something like rigging, I find it clearly is quite technical. So I think it's testament to you. So we're just looking at some of the comments in here about how people have found they've learned there's clarity now. They've learned, they understand things a lot more than they used to. Because I know you and I talked in advance of this, and we're both aware that this is quite it's a technical area of the industry. So to have people even coming away thinking, okay, I understand that a bit better now. I know lots of words. I know lots of things that are involved and have to be considered. That again, if you have, Fiona, to play devil's advocate slightly for your secretive technicians, I guess you could spend an awful lot of time trying to explain what you do sometimes, where you just kind of want to get on with it and get it done. And I'm sure they're under pressure and stuff as well. But it's definitely, I mean, from our perspective, it's an area we wouldn't get to do half of the amazing things and the interesting things we all get to work on without people like you and teams of riggers who figure out how to make that thing happen. So again, as you said, designs can be amazing, but then they go to the engineer in Crow Park so he can say, yes, you can put that on my roof. Thanks. And at that stage, you've done your design work, So I think we're good. There's no more questions flying in. God, I'd say we're nearly 2 hours, are we? Drew, for me, thank you very much. I appreciate that you did it. Again, I think this was always going to be probably one of the more niche topics we covered. But again, knowing some of the people in the room from having been on a lot of our other webinars, I know they're not riggers either. They're not into this side of the business, but they seem to have be coming away with a greater understanding of what's involved, which is exactly kind of what we wanted for people. So thank you very much to everyone in the room. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you Friday if you're back for Friday's one with Pete Dalton. That one is going to be fascinating. That's event command and incident management when things go wrong. Pete is a fascinating guy and has done this at high levels. And I think there's like 700 people registered for that one. I think it's mad. So we'll see you Friday. Again, bear with when is episode 2, Drew. we get enough shouts like that, we may have to try and do an episode 2. It could just be photos where we talk about the photos. I'm telling you.
Yeah, well, I've got no problem. If you want me to come back and talk over photographs,
Yeah.
I'm quite happy to do that.
I think it could be. You would definitely get 40 or 50 people in the room just fascinated by you describing each photo and what went into it. Just to repeat, like I said at the start, bear with me on certs and getting the recording up. I'm one recording behind at the minute, and certs I'm hoping to blitz this evening to catch up on those. So I know a few of you sent me messages saying that you haven't got yours. Don't worry, no one's gotten them for the ones you haven't gotten them for. Again, because us and the team at ACTAVO were operational at the weekend, I've fallen behind a bit. So bear with me. I'll catch up this week. Don't worry. Drew, thank you very much. Have a great day. And again,
thanks, everyone.
Guys,
thank you
to everyone in the room. And we're glad you got something out of this one. See you guys. Bye-bye.